Welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I am your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We have a very exciting conversation today with two of our esteemed colleagues who have written this, edited this absolutely, really, try to not be so effusive, very, very powerful book. Rabbi Ed Goldberg from the Woodlands Temple in Houston, Texas, the greater Houston area, and Rabbi Elaine Zecher, formerly of PAFTI, for those of you who speak a different language, Senior Rabbi of Temple Israel in Boston, Massachusetts, the editors of a new CCAR Press book called Because My Soul Longs for You, Integrating Theology into Our Lives. Let me put it over there, but probably my colleagues will have yes, on cue, right on cue. Let me get it right to the point here. If we have colleagues who are listening or watching, or adult education chair people who do that work within a synagogue or a JCC, etc., I really would encourage you to take a look at this book. It's available through the CCAR Press and also the Great God Amazon. To use as adult education, confirmation class. It's really opening up a tremendous amount of very, very interesting conversation about a subject which in most congregations we never talk about. So thank you very much, Ed. Thank you very much, Elaine, for it's good to see you. Congratulations on this book. Let me start with this very, very simple question. You write on page 8 in the earlier part of the book, quote, "It is human to long for God's presence," unquote. What does that mean? Elaine, what does that mean?
Well, I will let my co-editor speak about the reason that we chose the name of the book, because I think that it lends itself to the answer. But I will say that so often, as you said, we look at and we write about this, how God is the other three-letter word that makes us uncomfortable to talk about, and yet what the idea of God is, and the minute that we use the word God, we actually limit God because we have given a word to the idea. I think the reason that humans long for God, for something that is greater than we are, it is the ultimate act of our humanity to see ourselves placed in the world, that there is a force, that there's a power that is greater than we are, but it doesn't necessarily lessen our own agency and our own ability to experience the world. So recognizing that there's something sacred and divine out there that we can access is a very human trait.
Thanks. Yeah, I would just add that essentialism is where Judaism was for most of its history. In other words, we're trying to figure out what God is. Existentialism, I think for many of us, certainly of a certain age, was an exciting admission that we really are not going to understand God, but we can sort through our own selves and understand ourselves. And we understand because we're ourselves. We know that we long. We long for meaning. We long for transcendence. We long for being part of something bigger. And even though we have many names for it, often, if we're honest, it is God that we're longing for, if we understand that God can be manifest in so many ways. Now, we could have called this book, different writers talking about their experiencing God, and that would have been okay. That's certainly what the book is about. But there's just a beautiful piyut that includes the words, "Because my soul longs for you," you being God. And that's what it is. This is about emotion. It's more than rationalism. It's relationalism. It's about relating to God through the world.
Sounds very Heschelian to me. When he wrote God in search of man in search of God needs man needs God. But in the title, I just want to play with this a little bit, because implicit in my hearing, in my understanding as an old rabbi, The longing implies love. Could you just riff on that a little bit? How much involved in this searching and longing is this idea of love?
Well, you asked this question in a good time of year, because we're taping this during Elul. And there's a reason why the rabbis say Elul is an acronym for Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li, I, my beloved is gone. We're preparing for the days of awe, but we're not preparing for a court date. It might seem that way sometimes. We're actually preparing for a love reunion with God. It's more about the Avinu than the Malkeinu. So I think that's very important. It's about a relationship that we'll always have, much more than it is about passing an exam. Even though sometimes the imagery of the holidays is that, it's certainly not only that.
The other piece here, I think, is that when we hear love of God, I think that some people chafe at that. I think some people say, I don't get that. I don't understand that. I don't need the love of God. And the beauty of this book and being able to hear from 20 different souls coming to be aware that there is a relationship with this other, the ultimate other, and that it's not just the love of another human being. It's not just the love of ourselves, although those are two very important components of our lives. But to be able to have some kind of inner sense that our inner lives, that the nourishment of our inner lives can be sustained and helped through the recognition that maybe there is something more than us. Maybe there is something in the idea of the sacred and of the divine. And that's why I am so grateful to our 20 authors. One of the chapters written by my co-editor is that the willingness to show vulnerability, because when you talk about love, there's this kind of opening ourselves up, and all of those are pieces of how we hoped to model what does it mean to experience God. And notice we're using the word experience as opposed to know God or to be able to define God.
I just want to add, if I may, that in the holiday prayer book that we were both honored to be part of a larger team, one of the cool things I think, and most people probably won't notice it, but I'm going to let everyone watching or hearing this know, as we transition in the prayer book from Yizkor to Nila, and Nila, of course, has many themes, but one of the themes is we go from being written in the book of life to, we hope, being sealed in the book of life, right? Chatima tova, a good seal. As we go there, we have a quote, which is right there on the page before you turn from Yizkor to Nila. Set from Song of Songs, set me as a seal upon your heart. So now we're getting ready for the seal, but then it's the second part that really matters here, based on your question, Richard. For love is stronger than death. We're going to all die, but the love we have not only survives, but the love that God has for us and we have for God takes some of death's sting away. And
Right.
to me, that's amazing.
No, it's part of
necessary.
memory. No,
Yeah.
It's part of memory. It's part of Yizkor. We've all done enough funerals in our careers to understand that at that very powerful moment, so often what emerges is love. Is that love as it now transitions into memory? Eddie, you write an essay, since Elaine brought this up, I'll just jump right to it, about finding and experiencing God through fear, which is a very, very interesting concept. Probably a lot of people would say, how can I experience the sacred through fear? Could you just unpack that a little bit?
Well, I'm not sure you'd want to start off by experiencing the sacred through fear, but I do think one can learn to choose to embrace the fear. And that's really the point. They say that religious people, talk about hell, and spiritual people have been there. Or there's a book that was popular a number of years ago, which talks about the spirituality of that which is broken. In other words, somehow when you go through a life experience, as we all will, at some point, sometimes often. There's a new book by Bruce Feiler where he talks about how we think life goes like this, but it's actually like this, right? Up and down.
Right. The Yiddish
want to start off. Yeah, those fearful moments can be powerful spiritual opportunities if we are allowed to frame it that way. When someone says, I had this terrible illness and I survived, and now I look at the world differently. No one wishes that illness. Or I had a bat mitzvah mother this Shabbat, say, before the pandemic, we would have been all about the party, and we would have been all, and now that doesn't matter. And we realize that. So fear, struggle, all of these things can definitely bring a perspective which could very well involve the divine. I think God's transmitting. The question is, are we receiving?
And I'd like to pick up on that beautiful image that you say, Eddie, because I think that this book is to help develop a practice as well. The idea of the sacred and the divine in our lives is here. It's already here. It's not like it comes in and moves out. It's the sense of, are we paying attention? Where is our mindfulness? So it's not a matter of, okay, it's a terrible moment. Where is God? I think that whether there's fear, whether there's discussion, whether it's social justice, whether it's praying, whether it's organizing in our homes, whether it's cooking, whether it's art, writing music, all of those different ways, we all engage in so many different experiences. And yet, what makes us attuned to the idea that we could call this sacred, that we could call it divine, and not just let it wash over us, and in essence miss the moment. And I think there's certainly a lot of texts. I think the early Hasidic masters, the Baal Shem Tov said that there is no place where God is not. And we certainly have learned that. Many of us who've been part of IJS have honed our skills in the practice of feeling the divine, of experiencing the divine. And what I also hope that this book and reading this book will help is just to recognize, hey, this could happen to me. I could experience God, and God is in this place, and I'm paying attention to my experience. I didn't know it, and actually now I know it.
I was sitting with a conversion student this week, and she said to me, I was waiting for this moment where I would realize it was time. And then I had her read Harold Kushner's book, To Life. And she realizes now it's in the little moments where you experience God. You don't need to wait for the big Sinai moment, or for another religion, the road to Damascus. It's not about that. And, I always think of John Kabat-Zinn. He wrote a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And I love the fact that that's already in Judaism too. This idea that, as Elaine said, God's already here.
Yeah.
Well, it's that kol demama daka concept that, again, I was reminded of as reading through the book. Let me ask you a question, because it goes through some of the things you were talking about, but also it's hiding out in various in between the lines sometimes in some of the essays. Can you have spirituality without theology?
I think you can. I think you can, because that's what depth theology is about. And if you haven't had the chance to read Abraham Joshua Heschel's essay in The Insecurity of Freedom, I highly recommend it. And that idea was very foundational to us as we were talking about what integrated theology is and what it means. And sometimes it's what happened. I learned this from Rabbi Larry Kushner, when he said to his congregation, "Who believes in God?" No one raises their hand. Who's experienced God? Everyone raises their hand. So when we are looking for a definition, when we want to say this is what God is. This is that to me is, looking for a theological definition, and the wonderful preface by Rabbi Joe Skloot gives very specific definitions of what God can be. It's somewhat, I think, of an ironic introduction, because in essence what we say is, look at all those great different categories of God. Now let's move them, mush them all together, and give you the understanding that you don't have to say, oh, I'm in relationship with you. That's Martin Buber. The great awe that exists in the world. That's Heschel. I think that the sense of spirituality and recognizing that our souls are engaged with that longing, with something greater, is what depth theology is about. And of course, we use the image of very often, you can talk a lot about food, but when you get to taste the food, then you really are igniting all of the senses and the experience of it. And that's what we want people to do. We want people to taste the nourishment of the spiritual life and recognize it in that way.
I'm a big believer in organized religion, as you could probably guess, as a synagogue rabbi. But at the same time, when I would go to Aspen in the mountains in the summer, Saturday morning, I would walk up Ajax Mountain, and someone would say, there's a Reformed synagogue. You could go to synagogue. And I said, oh, I know that, but people built that building and God made the mountain. But that's not going to work for me every week. But to me, at that point, you could say I'm choosing spirituality or organized religion, because to me, it's really the same thing, as long as I feel it.
So that brings me to something, again, there's a tremendous rabbinic hyperbole. There are several essays as you go through the book that talk about what we all talk about, pathways, different acceptable pathways to encounter the sacred. So Elaine mentioned food, and there's dance, and there's body movements and music, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's almost as if, especially in juxtaposed to Rabbi Skloot, very, very lovely primer, Introduction to Overview of Jewish Theology 101, which is a great teaching chapter. But it's almost as if you're saying, look, in the 21st century, given the diversity of who we are as a people and the variety of experiences, you don't need to sit in a synagogue in a pew, but you can go to the ocean. You can go to the mountains. You can listen to what I sometimes do, a magnificent piece of the modern jazz quartet where everything blends almost perfectly into this, and it's spiritual. Are you in many ways just saying, look, this is all legitimate? These are all the different ways.
May I give a quick example? We have a wonderful essay from Miriam Klotz, who was a yoga teacher for me. Miriam, when she does yoga with a lot of Jewish people, she doesn't need to make Hebrew letters with the body for it to feel authentically Jewish to me, even though yoga itself is not Jewish, it's human. And there's something about the breath and movement which is part of our experience, as Joe Skloot talks about in his essay. There's no reason why we have to stop, at the head. Our whole body is part of our religiosity. So I don't need to give it a kosher hechsher, to say now it's Jewish because there was a guy who was teaching once in Florida, and he said, I've got good news. I can now teach equanimity because we found out there's a Hebrew word for it, hishtavut. And of course, no one in Florida knew what equanimity was, right? But we don't need to say now it's Jewish. And I think when you start labeling things, you take away some of the mystery.
Yeah. Well, so here's what I want to be really clear, because I think that this book came out of something that gives our lives structure. It came out of the work of the prayer book, and I don't believe this book dismisses at all what happens in the synagogue. I think that the need for being connected to a larger community, to be able to discover spirituality, to hone our skills in the work of our souls, happens within the life of community and the synagogue in particular. It is to the opposite. Actually, I think it does not dismiss. Don't go to the synagogue because that's not where you're going to find God. I think that is certainly not the intention, and I don't believe it's the impact of this book. I think it's the opposite, Richie. I think that what we're going to see as we look closely at some of these stories is how entrenched people are in the life of Judaism and synagogue life, and it goes back to how do we know how to find God? How do we know that God is here? How are we going to be aware? And I think that happens in the life of community and in the life of the synagogue. And look, the idea of integrated theology, that concept comes out of the work that Rabbi Elise Frischman did and Rabbi Judith Abrams of blessed memory in creating Mishkan Tefillah and saying, look, when we pray together, the significance of a prayer book as the window to our soul, as we have heard people speak about it, is to be able to have the conglomeration, to have the integration of a lot of ways of understanding God, so that then when we are in our worlds and we're in our lives, that it's not cut off, not like the head from the neck, but also from ourselves and the rest of the world. When Moses says to God on the mountain, going up to get the commandments for the second time, "Come on, let me see you," and God says, "You can't, but you can't, but you can see my back." And the Chatam Sofer says, sometimes we don't even realize that we have had the experience of God until we look back. And where is it? Where is that place of contemplation? Where is that place when we can be in that prayerful thinking mode to say, wow, I have experienced the sacred. I have experienced the divine in my life. And I think that's what gives purpose and meaning to go to the name of this podcast.
We're certainly not in any way discounting the synagogue at all. But at the same time, one of the reasons why this book was thought of was because, frankly, we had a lot of colleagues that would say things to me like, okay, I understand, Eddie, why Mishkan Tefillah has extra readings on both pages because, you're going to do it every week. But why do you have to have a 2-page spread and extra readings on the holidays? It's only once a year. And once again, one has to explain what integrated theology is. The reason why we have these different readings was not for variety's sake. It's to invite different views of God, all normative Jewish views, on the different pages. And so part of the reason for this book from the very beginning was to help flesh that out. So we can bring that into the synagogue from our daily life.
So I think one of and reading through the book, and when I finished it and started to outline for today, one of the messages I got was this is expansive. I mean, you're calling it says, open your heart and soul to the possibility of the divine, to the possibility of the sacred, and be free in your soul to accept it where you are at that particular moment in your life. Because how we experience God when we're 25 or 35 or when we walk off the bima, I'll tell you at age 76 is very, very different. Because life, that Yiddish expression that man plans and God laughs, well, she's laughing her head off. And most of the time, I want to ask before we start running out of time, because we could really go on for hours and hours. And this is why this book really belongs to be used as an adult education and teaching tool in congregations. But I refer back to my best friend, my buddy, Jakey, Rabbi Jakoski of blessed memory, my brother, who, when we were talking one day or one night, probably after a staff meeting for the union about the Torah blessing and that concept of la asok b'divrei Torah, letting the text speak to you. And I do want to get this as important as music and everything else. But the engagement of the sacred and the study of sacred text, I still think that's, it's like that Eila Devarim prayer in the prayer book, that the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. You engage the text, let the text speak to you, and that's going to lead to everything else. How important in the book, but equally important in your rabbinate, is that la asok b'divrei Torah, to find God.
If I can just say, first of all, thank you for mentioning Jake. We have a Yizkor booklet we put out every year in our synagogue, and one of the things we do is thank the rabbis who helped us come to this place. And Jake is mentioned along with Judy, who's also mentioned before, because they helped this particular synagogue where I am get it start. Mark Katz, a colleague, writes his article in the book about finding God in study. And I think we're living it right now. To put it another way, last week on Torah study, Ki Tavo, we're talking about our gratitude. We were wanderers. Our father was a fugitive, a refugee, Aramean, and now look how far we've come. And I said to the group, to study that now with what's going on in Afghanistan, it is completely different than it was a year ago, right? So, and it's not just a matter of saying, oh yes, of course. What is the text? What is God calling us to do? So we're part of the solution to this terrible problem. And so God is really coming out so strong in a text that just happens to be the Torah portion of the week.
Look,
every week.
Hosea, right now, when we look at Hosea, Kachui Machem Devarim Veshuvu El Adonai, take with you words in making tshuva with, to God, to returning to God. And I think that applies right here in this conversation, certainly in the month of Elul, of that the words that we use, the ability to articulate and the ability to take the words from the page of all the texts, the plethora of texts that we have in Judaism, that how do we return to God? How do we get there? It is through the use of the words. And sometimes words hinder us. As I said, as we started, sometimes just using the word God, people, they don't even want to say that. And that's why I think that the Yud He Vav He as the name of God are all vowels. So there's this openness, the open of the name even, as we find that text blossoms and life blossoms, and that's how we can get to the divine and get to the sacred.
So we're going to run out of time. So I'm just the last question, which is usually just a nice softball, easy question. In the month of towards the end of the month of August, and again, full disclosure, we're recording this the last day of August. It's going to post to the beginning of October. But at the end of August, there was in one of the op-eds in the New York Times, there was this very, very fascinating article that quoted a pastor about the fact that we just really need to talk about God more. And because people are living in such a primal way, especially in the pandemic, why are we still afraid in a larger institutional way? Why are we still afraid to talk about God? Eddie, I'll start with you.
I think in a larger institutional way, the people that I've studied with, learned with, are still products of the Enlightenment of 19th century Wissenschaft. And there is this feeling that you don't want to talk about something you don't know completely everything about. You say, hey, can you teach me about the Alamo, to a professor of history in Texas? Oh, no, I only teach things from 1840 to 1842, so I wouldn't be able to say anything. I think it's part humility, part fear that someone's going to call us out. And so I think we confuse intellectual experience, which is very valid, with the whole Geschichte, the whole thing. And that's not the case. So part of it is learning to reframe that it's not about right or wrong. It's about expressing our experience.
Elaine, last word.
We get imprinted with particular images of God, and we try not to. We give a gender to God. We give a sex to God. We give a form to God. And so when people say I reject God, I always ask, well, what God do you reject? What is your description of God? And so that's really what we're trying to peel back, all of those very set images in our head, to be able to see something much greater, bigger, lifting up our eyes, paying attention, seeing what is possible, so that we don't have to reject God. We can explore and question and struggle and ask and seek and long for.
And it's a lifelong process.
And it is
That's
a
the one.
lifelong process. Oh yeah, you don't get to reach a particular rating and say, I found God. Right? It's
I can see to the internet. I've seen everything.
I'm always finding God, or I always have the potential to find God. Because wherever you go, thank you, John Kabat-Zinn, that's where God is.
Rabbi Ed Goldberg of the Woodlands Temple in Houston and Rabbi Elaine Zecher of Temple Israel in Boston, the editors of Because My Soul Longs for You, Integrating Theology into Our Lives, CCAR Press, available now, Amazon, probably bookstores, good bookstores if you choose to go to them. Again, adult education people, colleagues, now that the holidays are over, get a hold of this book, start teaching it, give it to your confirmation class, the kids. This is not just for adults. These are for young people who are searching and seeking their own sense of the sacred, and it speaks to them as well. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you very, very much. Listen, this is after the holidays, so I hope your holidays go well, and I hope they went well. You just stay healthy, stay safe, take care of yourself, de-stress as much as possible. It's a crazy, crazy time. So thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us.
To all of you, again, thank you for watching or listening to today's edition of Secrets of Meaning. You can reach us at Rabbi Address at JewishSacredAging.com. You can check it out on the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. If you'd like to make a donation to help support the work of Jewish Sacred Aging, go to the homepage, JewishSacredAging.com. Scroll down to the conveniently located donate button and click. Secrets of Meaning is produced at the studios of Lubeck Media Companies here in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out to our producer, the award-winning producer, Steve Lubeck. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I look forward to greeting you on the next Secrets of Meaning TV show and podcast. And until then, stay safe, take care of yourself, give yourself a gift of time and study. Shalom, Todah.